Maren Reeves, my best friend, suddenly told me she'd gotten back together with her ex. I tore into her for going back to a man who'd already hurt her, but she only gave me a bitter smile. Maybe some people are just destined to keep getting tangled up with each other. Renee, I don't need your validation. I just don't want you to be mad at me. At the time, I didn't understand what Maren really meant. I thought she was only worried I'd get worked up over that jerk again. Seeing the conflict on her face, I couldn't bring myself to keep scolding her. I simply hugged her and told her not to settle for anything that made her unhappy. Then, a year later, I went to the hospital because of severe menstrual cramps and unexpectedly saw her leaving the maternity ward. Confused, I was about to approach her when a man hurried over, carefully helping her along and fussing over her every need. In an instant, I instinctively ducked behind the corner, my entire body trembling uncontrollably. Because that man was none other than Isaiah Cole, my husband of 3 years. I pressed myself against the cold tile wall, clamping both hands over my mouth as I held my breath. Through the narrow opening beyond the corner, I watched Isaiah Cole, my husband, the man I'd loved for 5 years and been married to for 3, carefully support Maren Reeves, my best friend of 7 years. The tenderness on his face was one I knew all too well. Isaiah lowered his head and murmured something to her, then casually reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Maren stared down at the report in her hand, her expression unreadable, but her other hand drifted instinctively to her still flat stomach. As they walked away, something compelled me to follow them, keeping my steps slow and quiet. I trailed them all the way to the parking garage, where I watched Isaiah open the passenger door and place one hand against the roof of the car, shielding Maren's head as she climbed inside. The black Maybach glided smoothly out of the hospital. Its taillights blurred into streaks of crimson before my eyes. I stood alone in the vast underground garage, my entire body shaking uncontrollably. It was early fall, but I felt as though I'd been plunged into freezing water. Cold sweat soaked through the back of my shirt. My phone suddenly vibrated twice inside my purse, the sound jarring in the deathly silence. With trembling fingers, I unlocked the screen. 2 text messages appeared, one after the other. The first was from Maren. Renee, are your cramps any better today? I sent you some heating patches. Remember to stay hydrated, okay? I'm not feeling great today, so I won't be coming to the office to keep you company. Love you. The second was from Isaiah. Babe, an important meeting came up, and I can't get away to pick you up from the hospital. Be good and take an Uber home. I'll bring you that Mont Blanc cake you love tonight to make it up to you. A violent wave of nausea surged up my throat. I doubled over the nearest trash can and retched until there was almost nothing left in my stomach. Tears struck the concrete floor, leaving dark spots behind. It was disgusting. I had no idea how I was supposed to go home and face Isaiah. I had even less idea how I could return to the office and look Maren in the eye. I felt like a spectacle stripped bare and abandoned in the middle of a crowded street. So I fled the city center in a panic, took a cab straight to my parents' house, and requested an extended leave of absence from work. The moment I opened the front door to my parents' house, my mother, Victoria Bentley, looked up from the sweater she was knitting. My father, Randy Bentley, sat beside her with his headphones on, listening to an old-time radio drama. At the sound of the door, Mom looked up. The instant she saw my face, the ball of yarn slipped from her hands and fell to the floor. Renee? What are you doing? What's wrong? Why do you look so pale? Dad yanked off his headphones and hurried over. The moment I saw the concern and love written all over their faces, the last of the strength that had kept me going finally gave out. Dad. Mom. My knees buckled, and I sank onto the rug by the front door. Then, like a child who had been hurt beyond repair, I burst into tears. Between broken sobs, I told them everything I had seen at the hospital and showed them the 2 sickening text messages. Dad shook with fury. He slammed his palm against the coffee table so hard the cups rattled. That scoundrel. That ungrateful lowlife. I'm going to his office right now, and when I'm done with him, he'll wish he'd never been born. And your so-called best friend? We've always treated her like family. How could she do something this despicable? Mom wrapped her arms tightly around me, crying as she rubbed my back. You've never been treated this way. Divorce him. You have to divorce him. Our family doesn't need a damn thing from his. I grabbed the hem of Dad's shirt, wiped my tears away with the back of my hand, and shook my head. I'm going to divorce him. But I'm not letting him walk away from this without consequences, and I'm not ending my marriage without knowing the whole truth. When they saw the resolve in my swollen, bloodshot eyes, my parents fell silent. They knew me too well. I had never been someone who could look the other way after being betrayed. Dad's eyes reddened as he crouched in front of me and stroked my hair. All right, Renee. We won't do anything reckless. But remember this, no matter what you decide or how far you want to take it, if the whole world comes crashing down, your mother and I will hold it up for you. I spent the next 3 days at my parents' house in a daze. Then the private investigator I had paid a small fortune delivered a thick manila envelope. I drew a deep breath, trying to prepare myself for whatever was inside. I wasn't the only person caught up in this anymore. There was also the ex with whom Maren had supposedly gotten back together. But when I opened the envelope, the truth hit me like a sledgehammer. Isaiah was her ex. I had always known there was a man who had broken Maren's heart, but I had never met him. She had told me the memories were too painful, so she had deleted everything connected to him and refused to even say his name. However, on an old private social media account, she had kept more than 5 years' worth of photos and posts from over a decade ago, preserving every trace of their sweet, innocent young love. They were childhood sweethearts. From 18 to 22, they had loved each other with a passion neither of them had ever forgotten. They had shared an entire history, yet when I first introduced them, they had pretended to be complete strangers. According to the investigator's report, Isaiah's parents had looked down on Maren's family for being poor and considered her beneath their social standing. They had refused to accept the relationship under any circumstances. In the photographs, Isaiah's eyes burned with an intensity one had never seen before. He had once stood outside in a torrential downpour for Maren. He had even begged his parents to let them be together. As independent and resilient as ever, Maren had fought beside him every step of the way. Unfortunately, his family had done everything they could to humiliate and crush her. They had driven her mother to the brink of taking her own life. In the end, the two of them were forced apart. She had left town, and he had fallen gravely ill. I let out a sudden laugh. I laughed until tears splashed onto the pages. So what if I was the perfect match for him? Compared to the tragic, all-consuming love story between the two of them, every sweet memory Isaiah and I had shared felt as bland as plain water. I met Isaiah when I was 27 at a charity gala. We hit it off immediately, talking for hours as if we'd known each other forever. I thought he was the soulmate fate had chosen for me, but maybe the reason we connected so effortlessly was that I was so much like Maren. I'd always cherished the natural chemistry and unspoken understanding Maren and I shared as best friends. Now, looking back, every one of those similarities had become a thorn lodged deep in my heart. The woman he could never forget had carved herself into his soul. I had only ever been her replacement. A thought suddenly struck me. My fingers hurriedly flipped through the journal until I found the answer I'd been desperate to know. When had their affair started again? A year ago, the night before Isaiah and I celebrated our second wedding anniversary, he got drunk at a business dinner and, out of sheer habit, called the number he knew by heart, Maren. She picked him up that night, and they ended up at a hotel. Neither of them came out until morning. After that, the same mistake kept happening over and over again. As I replayed every suspicious detail from the past year, I wanted nothing more than to slap myself across the face. Maybe some people are just destined to stay tangled together. Renee, I don't need your validation. I just don't want you to be angry with me. Maren's words echoed through my mind once again. I wasn't angry. I was disgusted. If they were destined to belong together, then what was I? Just the obstacle standing in the way of their destiny? I locked myself in my room for an entire day. The following day, I returned to the place where I'd lived for the past 3 years, where I'd believed was home. The moment I opened the front door, I saw a warm floor lamp glowing softly in the living room. Isaiah was sitting on the couch in gray loungewear, flipping through a stack of documents. The instant he heard the door, he set everything aside and walked over. As naturally as breathing, he took my bag from my hand and pulled me into his arms. You're finally home, sweetheart. Everything okay with your mom? His voice was low and gentle, carrying just the right hint of concern. He smelled faintly of body wash. It used to be the scent that made me feel safest. Now it made my stomach churn. Yeah. Everything's taken care of. I dug my fingernails into my thigh, forcing myself not to shove him away as I let him hold me. I stayed a few extra days with my parents. Sorry for making you worry. His eyes flickered for just a second, almost as if he'd finally relaxed. He reached up and brushed my cheek with his thumb. You still look a little pale. I'll have Maria make you some chicken broth tomorrow. He paused before smiling. Oh, and Maren's been asking about you too. She said you've been out of the office, and she hasn't had anyone to chat with. Hearing her name roll off his tongue so naturally made my heart seize as though someone had driven a needle straight through it. The two of them really were perfect actors. One played the devoted lover in bed. The other played the devoted best friend outside of it. I swallowed the icy hatred rising inside me and smiled as if nothing was wrong. I've missed Maren too. I looked into his eyes. Isaiah, next month is our 3rd wedding anniversary. I want to throw a big party. Everyone's been so busy these past few years. I'd love to invite all our friends and celebrate properly. What do you think? Of course. Smiling, he leaned down and kissed my forehead. As long as it makes you happy, do whatever you want. I'll have my assistant book the venue. The next day, I called Maren. She picked up after the very first ring. Her voice was filled with concern, flawless enough to fool anyone. Renee. You finally called. Are you feeling better? I've been so worried about you. I smiled, though there wasn't a trace of warmth in my eyes. I'm fine now, Maren. Next month is Isaiah and my 3rd wedding anniversary. We're throwing a party, and as my best friend, you have to be there. There was the briefest pause before she answered, her voice carrying a hint of strained restraint. Of course. Just send me the date. I'll definitely be there. Great. My tone stayed light, while my gaze turned ice cold. Maren, make sure you dress up. After all, there's going to be a very big surprise that day. After hanging up, I tossed my phone onto the table and closed my eyes in exhaustion. A month later, in the grand ballroom of the Langford Hotel, the city's most luxurious hotel, Isaiah had rented out the entire top floor. The ballroom looked like something out of a fairy tale, decorated everywhere with white roses I'd once casually mentioned I liked. And yet, the guest of honor, the woman everyone was waiting for, was sitting 20 miles away in the airport VIP lounge. On my phone, my parents were live streaming everything for me. On the screen, Isaiah, dressed in a perfectly tailored custom suit, moved gracefully through the crowd with a champagne flute in hand. However, the way he kept checking his watch betrayed the anxiety he was desperately trying to hide. Not far from him, beside the dessert table, stood Maren. She wore a champagne-colored gown with a loose, flowing silhouette. Though she'd deliberately chosen it to hide her pregnancy, after another month, the slight curve of her belly was beginning to show. The two of them kept their distance from one another, staying careful and doing everything they could to avoid attracting suspicion. I glanced at the time in the corner of my screen. It was almost time. The show was about to begin. A second later, the massive carved doors of the ballroom swung open. The once lively room fell instantly silent. Every head turned toward the entrance. The woman of the evening wasn't there. Instead, Dad walked in first, wearing a tailored black suit, his face dark with fury. Beside him was Mom in an elegant pantsuit, her expression razor sharp. Following behind them were 4 bodyguards dressed entirely in black. Isaiah froze for a split second before immediately putting on his practiced smile and hurrying over. Mom, Dad, what are you doing here? He looked past them, his brow tightening. Where's Renee? Why isn't she with you? Standing near the back of the crowd, Maren also walked over. Victoria, where's Renee? Mom ignored her completely and didn't answer Isaiah either. She couldn't even be bothered to fake a polite smile. Dad said evenly, barely containing the rage beneath his voice, Isaiah, Renee had something come up today. For the first time, Isaiah seemed to realize something was terribly wrong. The smile on his face slowly stiffened. Dad, did something happen? No rush. Mom let out a cold laugh before striding straight to the ballroom's control booth in her high heels and picking up the microphone. I'm sorry to everyone here today. I know you're all friends of Renee and Isaiah's. Her voice rang clearly through every corner of the ballroom. Unfortunately, Renee won't be joining us tonight. A murmur spread through the crowd. But she did ask me to bring everyone a surprise. She reached over and pressed the play button. The giant LED screen, which had been looping our wedding photos moments before, flickered. The music cut off. Then a high-definition photograph filled the massive screen without warning. In it, 19-year-old Maren and Isaiah stood in each other's arms, smiling sweetly at the camera. They looked completely, hopelessly in love. The silence in the grand ballroom was so heavy you could hear the soft humming of the air conditioning unit high above the crystal chandeliers. On the massive LED screen, the 19-year-old version of Maren was laughing into the camera, her arms wrapped around Isaiah's neck. Isaiah was leaning down, kissing her temple, his face alive with a fierce, youthful passion I had never once seen in our 3 years of marriage. I watched it all on my iPad screen, sitting in the quiet luxury of the airport's International Departure Lounge. Beside my glass of sparkling water lay my boarding pass for a long-haul flight to London, set to board in 20 minutes. On the live stream, my mother didn't pause. She pressed a key on the laptop in the control booth. The display flickered and transitioned. The crowd gasped in unison. The old romantic photograph vanished, replaced by high-resolution scans of hotel registration logs from the Grand Hyatt and the St. Regis, spanning the last 12 months. Below them were side-by-side photos taken by my private Investigator, Isaiah's black Maybach parked outside Maren's quiet apartment complex at 2 a.m., Isaiah carrying a bag of groceries into her lobby, and finally, a clear, crisp photo of Isaiah pressing Maren against the elevator wall. In her building, his mouth on hers. Jesus Christ, a voice murmured through the ballroom sound system. Someone had left an open microphone on near the front tables. Isaiah turned white as chalk. His champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the polished marble floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot. What is this? Isaiah's voice broke as he lunged toward the stage. Mom. Dad, what the hell is this? My father stepped into his path. At 62, Dad wasn't a tall man, but he stood like an iron pillar. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't shout. He simply adjusted his cufflinks and stared at Isaiah with cold, absolute disgust. Don't call us that, Dad said, his voice carrying clearly over the soft murmur of the shocked crowd. You lost the right to use those words a long time ago. Isaiah. Where is Renee? Isaiah demanded, his eyes darting wildly around the room. Panic finally breaking through his slick, polite composure. Renee. Where are you? He reached into his pocket for his phone, but before he could dial, the screen behind him shifted again. This time, it was a document from the St. Jude Maternity Center. A clear ultrasound image filled the 12-foot screen, complete with Maren Reeves's full legal name, the gestational age of 6 weeks, and the date stamp. From exactly 1 month ago, the very day Isaiah had texted me that an important business meeting prevented him from picking me up after my cramp treatment. The room erupted into a chaos of hushed whispers, sharp intake of breaths, and the frantic clicking of phone cameras. Maren, who had been standing near the back, turned and tried to slip out through the heavy double doors. But 2 of my father's security guards quietly stepped into the doorway, blocking her exit without touching her. Maren, my mother's voice rang out from the stage speakers. Don't leave yet. You were my daughter's best friend for 7 years. We ate at the same table. We welcomed you into our home when you had nothing. The least you can do is stand there and let everyone see what kind of woman you turned out to be. Maren froze. Her hands flew to her mouth, her shoulders shaking violently. She looked toward Isaiah for help, but Isaiah wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the screen, his breathing ragged, his hands trembling at his sides. On my iPad screen, I watched the man I had loved for 5 years disintegrate. Under the judgment of 200 of our city's elite, our business partners, our friends, our family acquaintances. I felt no joy. I felt no triumph. Just a hollow, icy stillness that settled deep into my chest. The boarding call for my flight chimed gently over the lounge speakers. I took a final sip of my water, closed the live stream app, and removed the SIM card from my phone. I snapped the tiny piece of plastic in half, dropped it into the ashtray on the side table, and pulled my carry-on bag behind me as I walked toward the gate. London in late autumn was rainy and gray, a mirror to the state of my inner life. I checked into a small, elegant hotel near Hyde Park under my mother's maiden name, turned off all personal electronics, and spent the first 48 hours sleeping for 14 hours at a time. It was as if my body was finally releasing 3 years of accumulated exhaustion. On the 3rd day, I turned on a fresh laptop and opened an encrypted line to Arthur Vance, my family's chief corporate attorney. Renee, Vance's dry, measured voice came through the speaker. I hope you are resting. Back home, things are active. Give me the summary, Arthur, I said, pouring a cup of Earl Grey tea. Very well, Vance sighed. The aftermath of the party was immediate. Your father formally severed all Bentley Group capital from Cole Enterprises the morning after the event. We pulled our $20 million investment from Isaiah's Smart Logistics expansion project. Without our backing, his primary lender called in their loan terms. Cole Enterprises stock dropped 16% by Tuesday afternoon. I watched the steam rise from my mug. And Isaiah? He has been calling your father's office 50 times a day. He came to your parents' house twice. Your father had him removed by security both times. He tried to contact your corporate staff, but per your instructions, you have been placed on indefinite leave, and all inquiries are directed through my office. Vance paused, shuffling papers. His mother, Eleanor Cole, attempted to intervene. I let out a soft, humorless laugh. Eleanor? What did she say? She called your mother, attempting to minimize the situation as a momentary lapse in judgment and suggesting that a public divorce would damage both families' reputations. Your mother told Eleanor that if she called again, we would release the full financial audit of Isaiah's personal accounts, including the funds he diverted from your joint account to pay the lease on Maren Reeves's luxury apartment. That made me pause. He used our joint account? A minor amount, about $12,000 over 6 months, but legally, it constitutes dissipation of marital assets during an extramarital affair. I have already drafted the petition for divorce on grounds of adultery and fraud. Under our state's laws, along with the prenuptial agreement he signed 3 years ago, he will walk away with virtually none of your wealth, and he will be personally liable to reimburse you for every cent spent on Ms. Reeves. And Maren? I asked, my voice dropping an octave. She resigned from her position at your firm 3 days ago via email. According to my sources, she has moved back into her apartment, but she hasn't been seen outside much. Isaiah's mother visited her apartment building once. Eleanor went to see Maren? Yes, Vance said smoothly. According to the building's doorman, Mrs. Cole spent 20 minutes in the apartment. The neighbors reported hearing shouting. Mrs. Cole left looking furious. I closed my eyes, visualizing the scene. 10 years ago, Eleanor Cole had crushed Maren Reeves because Maren was too poor, too ordinary, too insignificant for her precious son. 10 years later, Maren had returned, secretly carried Isaiah's child, and in doing so, had obliterated the prestigious Bentley alliance Eleanor had spent years cultivating. They were trapped in the very nightmare they had created. Arthur, I said quietly. Serve the divorce papers tomorrow morning. Deliver them directly to his board meeting. A month passed. In the small town of Surrey, just an hour outside London, I rented a small cottage with an overgrown garden and a fireplace that smelled of cedar wood. I spent my days walking through the misty woods, painting landscapes I had no intention of selling, and relearning how to exist without checking my phone every 5 minutes to see if Isaiah was home. I thought about Isaiah and Maren every day, but the pain was no longer a sharp, bleeding wound. It was turning into a dull, cold scar. What hurt the most was not the betrayal itself, but the utter fake reality of my last 5 years. I had thought Isaiah's gentleness was his true nature. I had thought his patience, his calm smile, his habit of bringing me tea when I worked late were marks of a deep, mature love. Now I realized it was simply the behavior of a man who was emotionally deadened. He hadn't been patient, he had been detached. He hadn't been gentle, he had been indifferent. The passion, the fire, the desperation, he had given all of that to Maren when he was 19, and when his parents ripped her away, he had simply closed that room in his heart and built a polite, comfortable life with a woman who fitted his family's requirements. And Maren had been my confidant. When I cried over my stressful early career, she was the one who brought me ice cream. When Isaiah and I got engaged, she was my maid of honor, holding my veil, smiling warmly while standing 3 feet away from the man whose mouth she had kissed for 5 years in secret. Memories. How many times had she looked at me with pity? How many times had she smiled? That bitter smile, and thought to herself, you have his name, Renee, but I have his soul. I was pulled out of my thoughts by the chime of my laptop. An email had arrived in my inbox. It was from an unfamiliar address, but the subject line made my breath catch. Please, Renee. Just 5 minutes. I opened it. Renee. I know you hate me. You have every right to despise me forever. I am not writing this to ask for your forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I just need you to know the truth. When Isaiah called me that night a year ago, I genuinely intended to just take him to a hotel and leave. But when I saw him crying in the car, calling my name, telling me how empty his life felt, I broke. I lost 10 years of built-up pain in a single second. We never wanted to ruin your life. We tried to stop. Dozens of times, Isaiah told me we had to end it, that you were innocent, that you were a good wife. But every time we tried to walk away, we were pulled back. It was like an addiction. Now everything is destroyed. Isaiah's family firm is facing restructuring. His mother is forcing him to surrender his chair on the board. He lives in a rented apartment near the industrial district. He doesn't smile anymore. He looks at me, and I can see the resentment in his eyes. He blames me for losing his standing, his company, and his quiet life with you. And the baby. I don't even know if he wants this baby anymore. Renee, you won. You ruined us. I just want to know if you're satisfied. Maren. I read the email twice. Then, slowly, a cold, quiet smile spread across my face. She thought I had ruined them. She couldn't see that I hadn't done a single thing to them except take off the blindfold. I hadn't forced Isaiah into her bed. I hadn't forced her to keep his secret. I hadn't forced them to indulge their pathetic, nostalgic fantasy at the expense of an innocent person. They had destroyed themselves the moment they mistook secret, cowardly dishonesty for destiny. I didn't hit reply. I simply dragged the email into the trash folder and emptied it. By the second month, winter had set in firm and unforgiving. I returned to my home city shortly before Christmas. Not because I wanted to see anyone, but because the final settlement papers for the divorce required my physical signature in Arthur Vance's office. I stepped out of the private car in front of the downtown legal high-rise. The air was crisp and bitingly cold. I wore a long ivory cashmere coat, my hair pulled back into a sleek, professional bun. As I walked toward the glass doors of the building, a figure stepped out from behind the heavy granite pillars. Renee. I stopped. Isaiah stood 5 feet away from me. In 2 months, he had aged 10 years. The tailored suits he used to wear were replaced by a dark, rumpled wool coat that looked slightly too big for his frame. His cheeks were sunken, his jaw covered in a dark, uneven stubble, and his eyes, once calm and clear, were bloodshot and shadowed by deep black circles. He looked like a man who hadn't slept a full night since September. Renee, he repeated, his voice raspy, taking a step forward. My security guard, a quiet, broad-shouldered man named Marcus whom my father had assigned to me, immediately stepped between us. It's okay, Marcus, I said softly, my voice calm and even. Give us 2 minutes. Marcus hesitated, then nodded, stepping back just enough to give us privacy, while keeping a close eye on Isaiah. Isaiah looked at me, his lip trembling slightly. You look good, Renee. You look well. I am well, Isaiah, I said, placing my hands in the pockets of my coat. What are you doing here? My attorney explicitly informed your counsel that any direct contact would be considered harassment. I don't care about the lawyers. Isaiah blurted out, his voice cracking, drawing sideways glances from a few passers-by. He caught himself, lowering his voice, begging with his eyes. Renee, please. Just talk to me for 5 minutes. Not about the company, not about the money. Just us. There is no us, Isaiah. The judge signs the final decree on Friday. I made a mistake. He reached out, his hand hovering in the cold air between us. As if he wanted to grasp my coat, but he didn't dare cross the line. It was an insanity, Renee. I swear to you, I didn't love her. It wasn't love. I stared at him, genuinely fascinated by the pathetic desperation in his tone. You didn't love her? Isaiah, you ruined your marriage, humiliated your family, and destroyed your own company for a woman you didn't love? I was obsessed with a memory. Tears welled in his eyes, spilling over his cold, reddened cheeks. When my parents forced us apart 10 years ago, it left a hole in me. I thought if I went back to her, I could fix the past. I thought I could prove to my mother that she couldn't control me. But it was a illusion, Renee. The moment the secrecy was gone, the moment we were out in the open, there was nothing there. She isn't you. He took a frantic step closer. She complains every day. My mother comes to her building and screams at her. She cries constantly about how I'm not supportive enough. She's pregnant, Renee, and every time I look at her stomach, all I feel is sickening guilt because I know that child cost me my life with you. I stood there, listening to him unravel. A year ago, if I had heard him say these words, my heart would have broken for his pain. But standing here now, looking at this desperate, broken man, I felt nothing but a profound, chilling pity. Isaiah, I said softly, my voice slicing through his frantic babbling like a cold blade. Do you know why you think you love me now? He froze, staring at me blankly. Because I'm the one who walked away, I said, my tone as measured as an instructor reading a manual. 10 years ago, Maren was taken from you, so you spent 10 years worshipping her memory. 2 months ago, I left you, so now you're going to spend the rest of your life regretting me. He shook his head wildly. No, that's not true. It is true, I interrupted. You don't know how to love a woman who is actually standing right in front of you. You only know how to pine after what you've lost. You loved Maren when she was a tragic secret. The second she became a real woman with real tears, real demands, and a real baby, you hated her for dragging you down. Renee. He sobbed, burying his face in his cold, gloved hands. And you never loved me either, I continued gently. You loved that I was respectable. You loved that my father backed your firm. You loved that I was quiet, convenient, and didn't make demands on your tragic little soul. I took a step closer to him, looking straight into his bloodshot eyes. You and Maren deserve each other, Isaiah. You deserve every bitter argument. Every hateful look from your mother, and every single second of the broken home you are about to raise that baby in. Because you built it yourself, brick by brick. I turned away from him without waiting for an answer. Renee, please. He yelled behind me, his voice echoing against the cold stone of the plaza. Don't do this. Please, Renee. Marcus stepped firmly into his path, blocking him from following. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the office tower, stepped into the warm, scented air of the lobby, and didn't look back once. The signing of the divorce agreement took less than 20 minutes. Isaiah's attorney sat quietly beside him, looking thoroughly defeated. The terms were brutal, but entirely legal. Isaiah forfeited his rights to our marital home, paid back the full $12,000 taken from the joint account, surrendered his remaining equity options in the Bentley-funded ventures, and agreed to a non-disclosure clause regarding our family's private matters. When it was over, Arthur Vance pushed the final document across the mahogany table. Isaiah signed his name with a trembling hand. As he set the pen down, he looked up at me one last time across the wide table. Are you happy now, Renee? He asked quietly, his voice dead and emotionless. I capped my own pen, placed it neatly inside my leather folder, and looked at him. I'm not happy, Isaiah, I said honestly. I spent 3 years of my life building a home with a man who was lying to me every time he kissed my forehead. I lost my husband and my best friend in a single afternoon. I'm not happy. I stood up, pulling my gloves on. But I am free. And that is far better. 3 months later, spring arrived in the city. The trees along the boulevard began to bloom with delicate white blossoms, the very flowers Isaiah had once used to decorate the ballroom for our fake anniversary. I had returned to work at my family's firm, taking over the international acquisitions director position. My days were long, demanding, and immensely fulfilling. My parents and I had grown closer than ever. Dad had finally stopped looking at me with worried eyes, realizing that his daughter was not going to break. One Tuesday afternoon, while sitting in a coffee shop near the financial district reviewing a merger proposal, I noticed a woman pushing a stroller along the sidewalk outside. It was Maren. She looked thin, her clothes plain and functional, her hair tied back in a messy ponytail. She looked exhausted, the dark circles under her eyes visible even from 30 feet away through the window glass. Beside her, holding a bag of dry cleaning, walked Isaiah. He was wearing a modest, off-the-rack suit, carrying his own coat. They weren't holding hands. They weren't talking. They walked side by side, separated by the stroller between them, moving like two ghosts dragged down by an invisible weight. As they passed the coffee shop window, Maren paused to pull the stroller shade down to shield the newborn from the afternoon sun. Isaiah stopped a few feet ahead, looking at his watch, his posture stiff with impatience. Maren looked up at him, her lips moving in what appeared to be a sharp, tired complaint. Isaiah turned his face away, ignoring her, staring blankly at the traffic passing by. I watched them for a long moment. There was no grand tragedy left in their story. There was no romance, no poetic suffering, no star-crossed lovers defying the world. There was only the bleak, agonizing reality of two selfish people who had blown up 3 lives to get what they wanted, only to realize that what they wanted was nothing more than a ghost. Maybe some people are just destined to keep getting tangled up with each other, Maren had said to me a year ago. She had been right. They were tangled, all right. Bound together by shame, guilt, financial ruin, and a child born into the middle of their mutual resentment. I picked up my porcelain cup, took a sip of my warm coffee, and turned my eyes back to the financial documents on my tablet. Outside, the spring wind blew a spray of white petals across the sidewalk, covering their footsteps as they walked away into the crowd. I didn't watch them leave. My life was finally my own, and I had a future to build.